In fact, you see some suspicious or unusual traces like the line here, this one here, which cannot be interpreted so easily. For more than 3,000 years, the golden face of King Tut has stared back at the world unchanged, perfect, and silent. It's the symbol of everything we imagine about ancient Egypt. But recently, scientists looked inside that mask for the first time, and what they found changed everything we thought we knew about the boy king. Hidden beneath the golden gemstones lies a truth that's been buried for millennia. Some are calling it the greatest King Tut mask discovery in decades. Others say this is shocking. Whatever it is, the Tutankhamon mask secret has finally been revealed. The boy king and the discovery that changed history. Picture this. It's November 1922. The dry air of the Egyptian desert hums with anticipation. Archaeologist Howard Carter kneels in the Valley of the Kings, brushing dust from a sealed doorway buried for thousands of years. No one realizes it yet, but he's about to make the most important archaeological discovery in human history, the King Tut tomb discovery that will stun the world. When Carter chips away the final plaster seal, he peers through a small hole and whispers to his assistant, "I see wonderful things," and he's right. Inside the chamber lies a dazzling collection of treasures, gold statues, chariots, jewelry, and even a royal throne. But among all these relics of unimaginable beauty, one object captures the world's imagination more than any other: the golden death mask of Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun, often called the boy king, wasn't meant to rule an empire. He ascended the throne at just 9 years old, after a time of religious chaos that almost tore Egypt apart. He ruled for less than a decade before dying suddenly around age 19. His reign was short, but his time in the afterlife would be eternal. The burial site was sealed in haste and somehow escaped the grave robbers who stripped nearly every other tomb in the Valley of the Kings. For over 3,000 years, it sat hidden under sand and stone, undisturbed by human hands. That's part of what makes this ancient Egypt mystery so fascinating. Every artifact inside every necklace and every painted wall is exactly as it was left in 1323 BC. When Carter finally opened the innermost coffin in 1925, he came face to face with the mask. It wasn't just an object. It was a message from another world, crafted from 22 pounds of pure gold and inlaid with lapis lazuli, obsidian, and turquoise. The mask shimmered under the torchlight like it was alive. Egyptians believed gold was the flesh of the gods, and to see Tut's face glowing in that dim chamber was like staring into eternity. For the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't an ending, it was a continuation. The mask wasn't meant to impress future generations. It had a sacred purpose. It was how the young pharaoh's soul would recognize his body in the afterlife. Without it, Tutankhamun's spirit could become lost forever. But what Carter didn't know that day was that the mask held secrets ones even the pharaoh's priests may have tried to hide. For decades, scholars celebrated it as a masterpiece of Egyptian craftsmanship and the perfect symbol of royal divinity. Yet, as technology advanced, strange inconsistencies began to surface, and these details were too precise, too odd to ignore. Why did parts of the mask appear to have been made differently? Why did some elements seem out of place? And most puzzling of all, why did it have features that didn't quite match King Tut himself? It would take nearly a century and a new generation of scientists armed with cutting-edge tools to uncover the Tutankhamun mask secret, hidden in plain sight. and what they found inside this golden relic. Well, that's where the story takes a shocking turn. The golden mask, Egypt's most famous face. When you look at King Tut's mask, it's easy to see why it became the most recognizable face in archaeology. The cobra and vulture on his forehead show he ruled both Upper and Lower Egypt. His eyes, made from quartz and obsidian, seem almost alive, as if they could open at any moment. The mask stands about 21 inches tall and weighs over 20 pounds. That's more than 10 kilograms of solid gold carefully shaped to match what ancient artisans believed the young pharaoh looked like. And for thousands of years, this portrait served one divine purpose: to help Tutankhamun's spirit find and recognize his body in the afterlife. Every detail had meaning. The stripes on the headcloth symbolized power and unity. The long braided beard was a sign that Tut had joined the gods, and the soft, almost peaceful smile on his lips suggested a ruler finally at rest. Even the materials told a story. Gold for eternity, lapis lazuli for the heavens, turquoise for rebirth, and carnelian for the power of the sun. But this wasn't just art. It was sacred technology. The ancient Egyptians believed objects carried spiritual energy. To them, this mask wasn't a decoration. It was a key, a doorway between the living and the divine. On the back of the mask, carved in delicate hieroglyphs, is a spell from the Book of the Dead. It speaks directly to the gods, asking them to protect the young pharaoh's spirit and guide him safely into the next world. Imagine what it must have been like for Howard Carter, standing in that tomb in 1925, staring into this golden face that hadn't been seen for over 3,000 years. The flicker of torchlight would have made it glow like fire. Even Carter, who was usually calm and professional, wrote in his notes that the mask was placid and beautiful. For him, it wasn't just an object. It was a conversation with eternity. But here's where things start to get strange. As scientists began studying the mask more closely in the decades that followed, they noticed odd inconsistencies. Parts of the mask seemed to be made from slightly different kinds of gold. The ears were pierced, something not typical for an adult male pharaoh, and some experts claimed to see faint marks beneath the engraved name. Was it possible that this perfect masterpiece wasn't made for Tutankhamun at all? That behind this legendary smile lay a far deeper story, one of haste, secrecy, and perhaps even deception? When modern experts started investigating those details, what they uncovered would leave archaeologists shocked, and it would change the history of this mask forever. A closer look reveals an ancient error. It started with the simplest detail, the timing. According to ancient Egyptian burial laws, the priests and craftsmen had only 70 days between the pharaoh's death and his burial. 70 days to prepare a royal tomb, 3 coffins, thousands of ritual objects, and of course, a solid gold death mask. That's less time than it takes to build a modern house. Could something so perfect really have been made in such a rush? The more archaeologists studied the tomb, the more it looked like Tutankhamun's burial had been improvised. His resting place was much smaller than any other royal tomb. Some walls were half-decorated, and several artifacts seemed oddly mismatched, as if borrowed from somewhere else. Even the outer sarcophagus was slightly too large for the space it was placed in, forcing workers to chip away at its edges just to make it fit. And then there was the mask itself. Under bright forensic lights, experts noticed subtle color variations in the gold. The face had a slightly redder tone than the rest, as if made from a different batch of metal. When tested years later, that suspicion proved correct. The face and the headdress were made using gold with slightly different compositions. At first it seemed like a small detail, but to Egyptologists it was a red flag. Why would the most sacred object in the tomb, the very face of the king, be made from mismatched gold? Unless perhaps the face had been replaced. The mask's ears deepened the mystery. In ancient Egypt, only women and children were usually depicted wearing earrings. Adult male pharaohs, especially in their funerary masks, were never shown with pierced ears. Yet here they were, clear as day on Tutankhamun's mask. It was as if the artist had been following a template made for someone else entirely. That wasn't all. Some researchers noticed faint irregularities around the name engraved on the mask. It read, Tutankhamun, but the area around the hieroglyphs looked slightly disturbed. It was as though the original inscription had been scraped away and recarved. Could it be that another name once rested there? Each clue seemed to build on the last, forming a picture of haste and substitution. Perhaps when the young king died unexpectedly, the royal workshop simply didn't have enough time to craft new treasures. Maybe they looked around, found an unused mask, and made a few fast alterations. Of course, if that were true, it raised one haunting question. Who was the mask originally made for? Whispers of an older missing queen began to surface among scholars. A woman whose power once rivaled any man's, and whose beauty was said to be divine. Her name, Nefertiti. And the next discovery would push that theory right into the spotlight. The Nefertiti theory. The mask that wasn't his. As evidence piled up, this theory began to sound more believable. The Tutankhamun mask's secret might point to his stepmother, the legendary Queen Nefertiti. Nefertiti was one of ancient Egypt's most powerful women. She ruled alongside Pharaoh Akhenaten during one of the most controversial eras in Egyptian history. Her name meant the beautiful one has come. And even today, her image, graceful, regal, and mysterious, defines what we imagine when we think of Egyptian queens. But after Akhenaten's death, Nefertiti vanished from the records. Some scholars believe she became a pharaoh in her own right, taking on a new royal name, Neferuaten. And when she died, her burial place was lost to time. So, when scientists found that Tutankhamun's golden mask had pierced ears and slightly feminine features, the idea began to take hold. Maybe this was never his mask at all. Maybe it had been crafted for Nefertiti all along. Egyptologist Joanne Fletcher was one of the first to point to the mask's subtle details. This mask was not made for an adult male pharaoh, she explained. When the gold was compared, they found the face was made of completely different gold to the rest. To her, the evidence suggested that the face of Tutankhamun was added later, soldered onto a mask, originally meant for someone else, and the pierced ears a clear sign of a high-status female. Nicholas Reeves, another Egyptologist, took the theory further. He noticed that the cartouche, the oval that contains the pharaoh's name, looked altered. The gold around it appeared smoothed and re-engraved. Reeves proposed that the cartouche may once have read Nefer-Nefer-Oten, the throne name of Nefertiti herself. In other words, Tutankhamun's name might literally be carved over hers. It's a haunting image, isn't it? The most famous artifact in history once belonging to a queen repurposed for her stepson in a desperate rush to meet the deadline for burial. And the story fits the timeline. Tutankhamun died unexpectedly, likely from a broken leg complicated by infection or malaria. He had no heir, and Egypt was in political chaos. The craftsmen responsible for preparing his tomb had only 70 days to finish everything. What if in their panic they recycled Nefertiti's burial mask? They might have altered the face, changed the inscription, and added the royal beard to make it suitable for a male pharaoh. Still, not everyone agreed. Some archaeologists dismissed the idea, arguing there was no physical proof like seams, solder marks, or missing inscriptions. But others countered that even the smallest irregularities in the gold could support the theory. As the debate grew louder, researchers turned to technology for answers. In the early 2000s, X-ray, fluorescence scanners, and portable spectrometers allowed scientists to study the mask's composition without touching it. And what they discovered added another twist. Slight differences in the gold alloy between the face and the rest of the mask. Was this proof of reuse, or simply the ancient artist's method for creating contrast? The question divided the archaeological community, but it also ignited a deeper investigation. And soon experts realized this might not be the only reused object in Tutankhamun's tomb. If the mask was second-hand, what else had been borrowed for his burial? The answers to that question lay buried with him deep beneath the shifting sands of the Valley of the Kings, the tomb that didn't add up. When Howard Carter first stepped into Tutankhamun's tomb, he was overwhelmed by its splendor. But beneath all that gold and glory, something felt off. The room was small, shockingly small for a pharaoh. The walls were half-finished, the painting seemed rushed, and the layout was simple, almost cramped. For a ruler of Egypt, this wasn't a royal resting place. It looked more like a last-minute backup plan. As experts began examining the site in more detail, they realized the entire burial appeared to have been thrown together in a hurry. The corridors were narrow, the ceiling was low, and the design was nothing like the grand tombs built for other kings. Even the paint on the walls was still damp when Carter broke through the entrance. That alone told scientists everything. They'd sealed the tomb before the plaster was dry. Then came the most puzzling clue of all. Many of the artifacts inside didn't seem to belong to Tutankhamun. The small statues meant to serve him in the afterlife, known as shabtis, were mismatched. Some had faces that looked too feminine. Others bore features that didn't resemble Tut at all. Egyptologist Salima Ikram pointed out that they must have been made for someone else and repurposed in a rush. The deeper researchers looked, the clearer the pattern became. Tutankhamun's burial goods, his jewelry furniture, and even his coffins seemed to be a patchwork of items borrowed or recycled from earlier pharaohs. Roughly 1/4 of everything found in the tomb may have originally belonged to someone else. To archaeologists, that was more than unusual. It was shocking. One coffin, for instance, bore signs that its nameplate had been altered, as if Tut's royal titles were carved over another ruler's. The middle coffin even had a face that didn't resemble him at all, with broader cheeks, a squarer jaw, and older eyes. It was as if the image of another king had been hastily repainted or reworked to fit a young man's story. All this suggested one disturbing possibility. Tutankhamun's burial had been botched. The priests and craftsmen who buried him must have been under immense pressure to finish quickly. The boy king's sudden death at 19 left them scrambling, and without a proper tomb ready, they were forced to use what was available. But that raises another mystery. Who had the power to rush the burial of a pharaoh? The answer may lie with Tutankhamun's successor, a man named I. His own tomb, located nearby, was everything Tut's wasn't grand, elegant, and fit for a king. The evidence began to suggest that I had taken the tomb, meant for Tutankhamun, for himself, leaving the boy king with a smaller chamber and second-hand treasures. If that's true, it means Tutankhamun's eternal resting place wasn't just hurried. It may have been stolen. And soon, scientific investigation would uncover exactly how much of this royal burial was truly borrowed. Science enters the tomb. As the decades passed, the questions surrounding Tutankhamun's burial only grew louder. For years, the mask and treasures had been admired as perfect symbols of Egypt's golden age. But now scientists were curious to see if the boy king's legacy was hiding even more surprises. The first breakthrough came with technology. In 2006 and 2007, a Japanese research team led by Professor Masayuki Uda brought cutting-edge instruments into the Egyptian Museum. Their tool of choice was Riken Keiki's portable X-ray diffractometer, an invention that could scan the surface of priceless relics without even touching them. It used X-ray fluorescence, or XRF, to read the elemental fingerprint of any material. When the golden mask of Tutankhamon was placed under the scanner, the results were astonishing. The gold wasn't pure. Instead, it was a carefully engineered mix of metals, mostly gold, but with traces of copper and silver. The ancient craftsmen had blended these metals to make the gold stronger and easier to shape. They then covered the surface with an ultra-thin layer of finer gold powder to give it that radiant glow. Even more fascinating was what they found in the blue stripes of the headdress. The pigment wasn't simply lapis lazuli or glass, as everyone had believed. It was something new, an artificial pigment created by Egyptian chemists over 3,000 years ago. The team called it Tutankhamun Blue. It was the oldest man-made color in the world, and proof that ancient artisans were experimenting with chemistry long before modern science existed. But the biggest surprise came by accident. During the restoration of the mask in 2015, conservators discovered something hidden inside the long braided beard, a hollow gold tube used to attach the beard securely to the chin. It was a tiny piece of engineering genius. The discovery showed that the mask wasn't just beautiful, it was mechanically sophisticated, and that wasn't the only revelation that year. The world learned that during an earlier cleaning, the mask's beard had accidentally broken off. Museum workers had tried to fix it in a hurry using epoxy glue. The quick repair went horribly wrong, leaving a visible mark that horrified historians. Egypt's greatest treasure had been damaged by modern hands. The scandal led to an international restoration project led by German conservator Christian Ekman. He and his team used beeswax, the same natural material used by ancient Egyptians, to reattach the beard properly. But before doing so, Ekman decided to take a closer look at the mask's structure. He scanned it with high-resolution X-rays, studying every layer of metal, every solder joint, every microscopic scratch. And what he found stunned him. Despite all the rumors, there were no signs that the face had ever been replaced or reworked. The gold composition was uniform throughout. Still, some differences in tone remained, like a slightly redder face and a slightly paler neck. Was it just an artistic choice? Or did it mean something deeper? Ekman wasn't ready to say, but he knew one thing. The mask held more secrets, and modern science was finally equipped to uncover them. And when his investigation reached its final stage, the answer he found would silence decades of speculation. And it would prove that even after 3,000 years, Tutankhamun still had one last surprise waiting to be revealed. Christian Ekman's final examination. By the time Christian Ekman began his full investigation of the mask, every Egyptologist on Earth was waiting for answers. For decades, scholars had argued over whether the face on that gleaming relic really belonged to Tutankhamun. Was it his true likeness, or a masterful patchwork created in panic after his sudden death? Ekman had the rare privilege of getting closer to the mask than anyone since Howard Carter. Working inside the Egyptian Museum's secure conservation lab, he studied it for months under high-powered microscopes, scanners, and X-ray beams. Every inch of the mask was documented. Every particle of gold was tested. And what he found turned the debate on its head. First, the supposed evidence of tampering the uneven line around the nameplate wasn't a hidden signature of another ruler, it was simply a join between two sheets of gold. The cartouche hadn't been re-engraved over an older name at all. It had always read Tutankhamon. The faint lines other researchers had seen were natural seams created when the craftsman hammered separate gold panels together. Next, Ekman tested the gold itself using XRF spectroscopy. If the mask's face had been cut out and replaced, the gold in that section would show a completely different chemical composition. But the data told a different story. The face, the headdress, and the collar all shared the same alloy mixture, about 97 pure gold with traces of copper and silver. In short, it was made from a single batch of metal. He also examined the famous blue and red inlays surrounding the eyes and eyebrows. If the mask's face had been altered later, the intense heat from soldering would have cracked or melted those delicate glass stones, yet they were untouched, perfectly preserved. That was the proof Ekman needed. This masterpiece had been made all at once, not pieced together from separate relics. When his report was released, archaeologists were stunned. After a century of rumor and speculation, it turned out the mask wasn't recycled, borrowed, or altered. It was created specifically for Tutankhamun. Every stroke of the hammer, every gem, and every engraving had been made for the boy king alone. It was a breathtaking conclusion. Somehow, in just 70 days, the time allowed for mummification and burial, Egypt's artisans had produced one of the greatest works of art in human history. The young pharaoh who died in haste had been honored properly with a masterpiece that would outlive empires. The ancient mystery was finally solved. But the story wasn't over yet, because even after 3,000 years, Tutankhamun's mask would still face one final trial. This time it would not be from tomb robbers or rival pharaohs, but from the modern world itself. The mask's legacy and modern controversies. Even after the mystery seemed solved, Tutankhamun's mask refused to rest quietly. For almost a century, it had survived tomb robbers, sandstorms, and time itself. But in 2014, the world's most famous artifact was nearly undone by human carelessness. During a routine cleaning at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the mask's long golden beard, its most recognizable feature, snapped clean off. Panicked museum staff tried to reattach it quickly, using a strong industrial glue more suited for plumbing than for priceless antiquities. The epoxy hardened instantly and left a visible layer of residue around the chin. The result was heartbreaking. What had survived 3,000 years of history was nearly ruined in a single afternoon. The backlash was immediate. Egyptologists everywhere were horrified. "This is shocking," cried one headline. The government stepped in, launching an official inquiry and assigning a team of experts to undo the damage. And once again, Christian Ekman was called to the rescue. He and a group of conservators worked carefully for months, using tiny wooden tools and microscopes to remove the hardened glue bit by bit. When the beard was finally free, they reattached it using beeswax, the same material ancient Egyptians had once used for delicate work. It was a poetic fix, modern science restoring ancient craftsmanship. Today, the mask gleams once more in perfect condition, safely displayed behind glass. It's the crown jewel of the new $1 billion Grand Egyptian Museum, where it's surrounded by over 5,000 other artifacts from the young pharaoh's tomb. Visitors can stand just feet away from the golden face that defined an era and stare into the same eyes that once watched over a boy king's eternal rest. But perhaps the real reason the mask continues to fascinate isn't just its beauty or value. It's that it still holds the fingerprints of an entire civilization, its faith, its fears, and its obsession with eternity. And even though the science says the mystery is solved, There's something about that face frozen in gold that keeps us wondering. Do you think Tutankhamun's mask was really made for him? Or was it borrowed from someone else like Queen Nefertiti? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. We'd love to hear. For now, we're out of here. Catch you next time.